And of course, always it's not good if these things are just, you know, so black and white, Ukrainian, Russian, you know, like when it's like one identity and you collect that they represent the ugly things, or, you know. But I mean, more and more we were discussing it in the team and realizing the situation, how it's getting worse and worse. We realized that it's important to follow it. For us, we decided that if we find a film which is directed, for example, by a Russian filmmaker, which brings something new to the context we live in, because of course it's different in Eastern Europe, where we have many information about every day, like what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in Russia, what's the culture scene then. So I mean, we don't need much information bring to us to understand the situation. Yeah, I think that's the difference between East and West, because there, for many people, some kind of information might be important to somehow orient themselves what's really happening. But here in Czech Republic, I mean, in general, in Eastern Europe, it's not the case. So we decided to try to find if there is a film which is bringing something new, and then we can select it. But in general, I think it was important gesture, because you know how works propaganda. Propaganda creates a feeling that nothing is happening. And in a way, this is not a war, it's invasion. So it's not about the two countries started to war between each other. Yeah? But it's that one country is invading the other country, but in that country which is invading, it's nothing happening. So most of the people are having their normal lives. That's why it was so important to have these sanctions and all the communication around, that at least something gets to the people living in Russia, that it's not normal. That's why it was so important that sport matches were banned, you know, that Russia was not taking part in football cup and all these things, because this is showing that it's not normal, that something is happening. And then even people living in Russia have to somehow think about it. Yeah? Also, what's important to know that Russian Minister of Culture is one of closest cooperators of Putin. So this strategy used for at least 10 years to somehow develop independent Russian filmmakers supported by Russian government was, from today's perspective, part of a plan. Yeah, that they wanted to create a feeling in West that they are normal country, but wanted to prepare something other. So I mean, it's more complex thing. Yeah, we in West, like even Czech Republic is part of Western culture, same as Ukraine. Yeah, we very much adore independence. So when we had to face this appeal, we were somehow shaken that we are not getting independent. But I think it's also that our choices are related to, you know, ethical values, and that it was just underlining that our choices have this kind of dimension, that it's not only about us, but even like, you know, if you play a film, even if you screen a film, even if it's against Putin, propaganda can create a feeling that Russian films are screened in Europe, that nothing is happening. Yeah? So I think this is the case that we have to somehow go through and understand that really it's a very special situation we are challenging.
Maybe just to add what we did and how we did and what was the thinking and in Kosovo, which is much similar to what Marek mentioned. We also start talking about what should we do as a programming team, but also in a wider look in a way as a country, because we've gone through the war, and the pretext for the war was very similar to what Putin put forward as a pretext to invade Ukraine. It's a Russian minority or Russian people, so I am going there to protect Russian people. Serbian government started the war with the pretext that there are Serbian minorities who are endangered, so we go there to protect them. And that was the pretext. So we've gone through the similar situation, and of course, I was thinking, for example, today, what would it be if for example, we had the festival at that time, and we send the appeal to the world. Because I cannot imagine showing a Serbian film during the war in Kosovo. It's impossible. So I completely understand the logic and the feeling behind the appeal to the international community and to other festivals to boycott. Because it's cry. You know, you send an appeal to not validate aggression. I mean, film festivals may be not the powerful, big entities that can influence. It's much more, if I can say so, important to ban, let's say, Russia from playing football. Because then all of the world knows. And we had a close session when we were discussing this, and next to me was a guy from Serbia, a programmer. So what he mentioned was his anger that he never forgive to the international community that they throw out Serbia from European Championship, and then Denmark got into because of that, and then Denmark became a European champion. No, I mean, the guy is remembering it more than 20 years. So I said, this we never forgive to the. So I mean, the way of the thinking is similar, and that's why I'm saying that banning from these large, important competitions is important, and it should be like that. Also, at the film festivals, what Marek mentioned is this perfect strategy of the Ministry of Culture to use it as a tool for propaganda when they when it looks like they fund independent filmmaking or filmmakers into saying that, you know, we have nothing to do with they are independent. Of course they are not. So we decided that we will not invite any Russian filmmaker, or I mean any Russian film that was funded by Russian Federation. In the end, we did invite a film which was a co-production between several countries with a filmmaker in exile. But in the meantime, something very interesting happened with the government of Kosovo, and the decision to invite journalists from Ukraine and give them safe haven, place to work, place to stay, and also, I think, a monthly salary. So we used this opportunity, invited a couple of journalists from Ukraine to attend the festival and be part of this kind of discussion and panels. So this was like a starting point in thinking about this difficult and how can I say, task ahead of how to react to this situation as a curator, as someone who brings films and wants to open up the discussion. And I think it's only actually the beginning. We will have to have this kind of discussion in the near future, still, because it's not the only ethical issue that we are facing. There are others, and we don't really talk too much, and we don't really know who is doing how, because of course there are no rules, there are no set rules that we can stick to it. Every festival, every curator has some sort of their own rules, and you cannot blame them too much, because they say we have liberty, and this liberty, especially in the Western Europe, is something that we have to adhere to it. So sometimes it's a tricky situation, but I think we will have to talk more often, and I'd like to praise Marek and this festival for bringing forward this kind of discussions.
I am talking from a very different context. Portugal is one of the most Western countries in Europe. I think there is something I'd like to add. The problem with not just Russia, but certain countries that have a consistent attitude towards the world that is imperialistic, violent, etc., did not start with the invasion. I mean, of course, the invasion is the absolute critical point, but it didn't start. And I joined the direction of DocLisboa in 2012, and we had a list of banned embassies, and one of them was Russia. We never wanted to have any relation to Russia, to China, to Israel, and there were some others. Angola, for example, Guinea-Conakry. So I'm talking about countries that are governments that build their own sense of governance by smashing their own people first and then other people's. So this said, I think that for me it was very important always to distinguish institutional relations, so relations with state power, and artistic relations. And I'm not saying that artistic is not political, I'm not that stupid, but there's still a difference. So I remember having Russian filmmakers coming to the festival and not even doing a Facebook post about their premiere because they were scared. I mean, Russia is a dictatorship for a long time now. People were being arrested. So it's for me, it's a little bit difficult from this point of view, and also from the point of view of a country that had, you know, almost 50 years of dictatorship, where dissidents was crucial, and exiled people were crucial to end the fascist dictatorship, but also to end the war, because we were doing a war in 3 countries in Africa, Angola, Mozambique, and Guinea. Dissidents was crucial. So the people, the artists, the intellectuals, the teachers, the people that were abroad, that had fled the war, the condemnation to war was one of the strategies that the government had against dissidents. So you would be condemned to go to war. So the people that escaped all that were crucial to end the dictatorship. And so for us, and I say us because it's a cultural context, it's a cultural question beyond any personal beliefs, it's a little bit difficult to separate or to even start thinking about this idea that we cannot trust dissidents. We cannot believe that someone who refuses to go to war or who refuses to cooperate with their government is not somehow a dissident. And I even think that if we start, or if we establish a relation towards these people as dissidents, it may empower in some way a sense of dissidence. So I don't remember programming a film funded by the Russian Federation, as I don't remember programming a film funded by the Israeli government. It's something that didn't start with the war. So now it's, of course, it's different. It's a different context. And of course, in March was different from where we are now. And it will be different in 1 year. So of course there was more responsibility. Probably when now I see a Russian film, I will probably even do even more efforts, or a film made by a Russian person, I will probably do even more efforts to understand the context. And if I'm in doubt, probably between 2 very important films, one by a Russian, one by a Ukrainian, maybe I will give a preference to a Ukrainian filmmaker if I'm, you know, binded. But for me, the idea of a blind boycott is something that doesn't seem productive, and also doesn't seem productive within, which I find very important, within the discussion of the European Union's attitude towards this, because the European Union and some countries were the main funders of this war. And washing this collective responsibility is a problem. And so I don't think that it's by doing this sort of well-intended, very sounding, big actions that look, you know, go on the direction of where it should go. I don't think that's the best way to actually problematize what the responsibility of Europe is in this. And so I believe in discussion, as Veton was saying, and I believe that things need to be, we need to have a little bit, I'm sorry, maybe this sounds a bit harsh, but I think the open wounds need to stay open somehow. In the sense that I prefer to have a problem and a difficult discussion, and I've had very difficult discussions years ago related to this question, than to go as if everything was somehow a weird piece within a bubble.
So that's an element of disagreement between you, but it also brings up a question which I think is one of the dividing lines which you can use to approach those questions, which is that of institutions and who are the actors and what their different abilities to shape a context is. And so you talked about embassies that were blacklisted, and so I'd just like to have a clear idea of, maybe for people who aren't so familiar, who are watching us or who are attending, with the inner workings of a festival, what the actors can be who bring pressure in one way or another for or against certain programs, and what kinds of strategies they can use to bring pressure. So if you don't want to work with the Russian embassy, what kind of problems does that create? Or if you do want to work with a certain embassy, what kind of problems that creates? What other actors are there? Maybe we can take the same order all over again.
Maybe before we get more general, I would like to add what you mentioned, Victoria, at the meeting we had as a programmers. And it was really, again, like interesting to me to imagine, because even we were going through, I didn't have this like concrete perspective of the situation, that it's unfair when one country is destroying the other country, you know, infrastructure, everything, like when people are just surviving and living from day to day, and it's not happening in the other country. So, for example, film industry is continuing. So, you know, then they have films in case of audiovisual sector, yeah? They have films which they can send, distribute to our festivals, even art films, critical films, but they have something with which they can be present. But the country which is invaded and being destroyed, is having completely different, you know, situation. The filmmakers became army members. So I think this is part of this appeal that you know, it's appeal about this inequality for art, and I think it is important to think about it as well, yeah, in this particular situation.
No, I'd say definitely it is. I mean, it's you know, positions are not equal. On one side, you have an aggressor who is still able to produce culture in their own, attacking a country again with another pretext that their culture is not a culture. Our culture is a culture. So, I mean, it's very retrograde thinking in a way that there exists a superior culture to the other one. So, but to come back to your question, I think there are many different ways that festivals get pressure. Embassies are one, of course. Sponsors, partners are maybe lesser, but still. But of course, in our context, embassies sometimes can be players that try to influence And because I live in a country that has not as many embassies as other countries, it's a new country, and not all the countries that have recognized Kosovo have their embassies. Maybe the situation is a bit better than imagining a country where there's a Chinese embassy, for example. And for those who don't know, Chinese people or Chinese embassies are one of the largest pressure-putting bodies to the festivals. Israel is probably, but in much more sophisticated manner. We, for example, have had a small situation with the Turkish embassy when we announced that we would be doing a focus on Armenian cinema. And in order to do so, we actually collaborated with a Turkish curator, you know, thinking that it will be we would be somehow on a safe side. Most of the films and filmmakers actually were living in Turkey, so we imagined that it wouldn't be a problem for the embassy. So we are bringing some films from Armenian filmmakers who actually reside in Turkey. Films had been shown in Turkey, but still, it sparked something that embassy reacted. And we also had, just similar to Sarajevo Film Festival, we had signed a sponsorship contract with Turkish Airlines for kind of long-term contract, 5 to 10 years, probably a lucrative one, which they terminated in a week. So this kind of pressure exists. We also had a similar one, but again on a smaller side for artistic side of the films, whether this film is good and whether it shows Turkey in a good light, or a banal question. Why did you select exactly this one? There are so many great Turkish films. You could have chosen one that puts a better light to the country. But those are, in my opinion, smaller types of pressure. Chinese, as I mentioned, they are much more aggressive. So they insist on pulling out the film, and some festivals did fall on this pressure, and they did remove films. It does happen, and I don't have an answer to how to react to this kind of pressures, because it depends on the festival, depends on the country, depends on what kind of film it is, what kind of pressure it is. I don't think there is a set of rules that apply to all of them. And also to the integrity of the people who make the festival, whether they can stand the pressure, whether this affects or how much would it affect for the future of the festival, because as a people who organize a festival, you have this obligation and responsibility to think about the future of the festival. It should not be a reaction in effect. So, no, a lot of things. But yes, the pressure do exist, and they're still there.
I don't know if you have something to add to that, or...
Just, I think the question is how do we want to collaborate with? Because whenever we collaborate with an embassy, we are collaborating with the state, right? With the government of that country, and so I think it's a question of respect for the filmmakers of that country. For example, I know if I have money from the Chinese embassy, I will endanger the filmmakers that I'm showing. But it's also a question of independence of the festival itself, political independence, moral independence. I don't know, I did a full retrospective of Chantal Akerman's films. Of course, we could have had a lot of money from the Israeli government. We didn't even invite them. So I didn't want them there. And that's it. It's a question of political responsibility and of also putting the discussions where they should be. The institutional discussions are to be held in an institutional arena, and that is the institutional arena. Where does your money come from? How do you relate to the states around you? Just to say, Marek, I never thought that there is not an unfair situation. I know that Ukrainian filmmakers are not filming. What I'm saying, and they need, of course, what I'm saying is that I believe, maybe it's stupid, maybe I'm being, but of course we can only speak, not only, but our acquired experience is something important. I believe that supporting dissidents and fueling dissidents is fundamental. Fundamental to break the Russian, whatever that is, octopus, which I'm not sure we can. But I'm sure that it's harder to come from the inside. It's.
But I wasn't referring to this. Yeah, of course, it's a different situation. I was speaking about Russian films in general. Yeah. But I mean, following what Veton said about this influence of, same as you, like embassies and so on. It's also interesting to think that we, like culture events, are part of propaganda or maybe used for propaganda. And for example, many conflicts are happening in the world, in our region, Armenia and Azerbaijan, yeah? And we have received certain films from these countries, and we were really very careful about selecting them, because you have to know many details about the filmmakers, about the background of the film, of the institution supported it, because otherwise you can easily, with good mind, do something what in second day might be used against your wishes, against your ambition. So I think the world is getting more complicated, and it's a responsibility of us to be more careful, or even more careful than we are used to be in these days during selecting films, during this selection process.
And I just also were thinking, it's, well, if back to Russian people, it's maybe quite difficult for me now really to understand who are those people, dissidents, whom concretely you speak about. I mean, because like from our impression, first of all, we see Navalny, which, in his interview claims that, well, Crimea, it's a question, maybe it should stay that way, And on the other way, we actually don't see these people. I mean, for example, in Europe, in Germany, there are not like massive scale protests of these people who already left, Russia. I don't know for what reasons. I have only suggestions. Maybe they are still afraid, or for whatever reasons, or maybe they are not, that confident about this actual idea. So I mean, it's a very difficult question. I mean, do we have these people whom we could support, whom we could rely on, and who will change, the whole situation? And yeah.
Coming back to you as well, I'd like to draw on something that Cynthia said, which is to obviously everything did not start on February 24th, and so I just in the same kind of questioning, how did your festival approach this question of, for example, programming Russian films or dealing with the question of the war in Donbass and the annexation of Crimea before, in the years up until this year, before the invasion of February 24th?
So sorry, could you please?
How? I mean, I imagine you also face the question of including or not certain Russian films, or.
Yeah, that's started actually after 2014, and that was a big issue for me personally, for many people, also in our team, because when the war started, we already realized something wrong is going on, and it was a long process, I think 8 years long actually, to came to this point, because like I myself was born in a family of Russian-speaking Ukrainians, we have all these books like Czech, Dostoevsky, Dostoevsky. I read all of this when being like in a primary school. That was a very important part, I mean, of my background. And we were invited Russian filmmakers to Doku Days, mostly, of course, not from state, funded films, but Marina Razbeshkina school, for example, And then we realized that something wrong is going on. And I remember we took a decision internally in the team that wasn't officially released, that we are stopping, inviting those films. And back then I was still not sure. I mean, I was this kind of person questioning that. Well, there are still some good people. There are this interesting documentary people from Marina School. Maybe we still need to invite them. I mean, and in 80 years' time now, I see how blind we were. I was personally, blind because really it got even worse, than that. But yes, we were already since 2014. We already had this very strong idea inside the teams that we are not going to invite them. And and also the whole, was only my situation, it was a situation of the whole city, of the whole part of Ukraine. Somehow people, lived in this bubble, truly believe that this will never come to their place, to their festival, whatever. And I believe that in those 8 years' time, a huge decolonizing thing happened to all of us, So now what we see, it's a very sad time because you have to leave a lot of things you had in your head, all this Russian culture, Russian books, to put it away and to create another context to fill this emptiness in yourself, So, I mean, to create this, to reshape this Ukrainian culture, to find out, to find some things which were stolen basically by Russian and Soviet propaganda, and to understand who we are, what's our culture about, and to tell us about this to the whole world. That's what happened in these 8 years. During the time we were basically canceling, in a way, Russian films. We were still, let's say, maybe have some contact, but honestly, I never had a really good friends in Russia. I don't know for what reasons also, so that's how it was.
And taking time again as an angle, so if we've looked at what happened before and how it led up to this, but you've also raised the question of how you'll have to rethink this in the years to come, because so this year this conversation is spawned by the immediacy of the event, but what kind of how will the situation change and how that changes? And so I'd like to ask you, Veton, a question, maybe because so you're the artistic director for a film festival in Kosovo, and I was told that you programmed a Serbian film in one of your editions, and it was the first time that a Serbian film was programmed in your festival, and it led to controversies, and so that in a way is the point of view of the after that we're trying to look. It's after the war is finished, so do scars heal or do you not let them heal? And so how and why did you decide to program that film, and what were the reactions to it, and who brought in what, and if you could talk a bit about that.
Okay, thanks for the question. I mean, I think it's important, even though I don't know how it relates now to what we are talking now and to Ukraine, because when that happened, the war had ended. So it's a crucial difference. The war in Ukraine is still going on, and I think the most important thing at the moment is for that war to end. Ideally, with Russia to lose the war, retreat, so the whole territory that has been occupied returns. This actually didn't really happen exactly like this in Kosovo. So there is still dispute, even after more than 20 years after the end of the war in Kosovo. Okay, so we started the festival in 2002. The first film we invited from Serbia was the next year, 2003. It went not with much fanfare or some controversy, because it was a film about a war crime that happened in Kosovo, and the bodies that were found somewhere in the lake in Serbia. The filmmaker got mysteriously killed in a car crash not long time ago after the film. But the next year we invited another film, which was about a group of Roma people that moved from Kosovo to Serbia with the end of the war, because some of the Romas, were labeled as collaborationist. So when the war ended, they were afraid, and they moved out of the country. They started doing some collecting some scrap metal and paper and everything. So film was about this. So I invited the film, even though there was a lot of resistance from the team. The main thing was, it's too early. It's a Serbian filmmaker. We should not invite. They were aggressors. It's this kind of justifications. In the end, we did invite the film. The film got main prize. And after film getting the main, because there was no controversy actually during the festival that there is a film included from Serbia. I think the tension was not so high, but when it won, a journalist who was on holiday somewhere in Montenegro wrote an article, even without seeing a film, that how dare this festival invite a Serbian film and how traitorous they are. So it created a sort of a tension with attacks, but not mostly why the festival invited, much more why the jury awarded. And I would like to mention this anecdote that one of the members of the jury at that time was an activist who is now Prime Minister of Kosovo. A very young, very progressive, very leftist and very film lover guy who spent, I think, 28 months in the Serbian jails, but was very progressive thinking or seeing some progressive idea at that crucial moment of kind of forgiving and realizing that it's good to award a film, even though he was very critical about the Serbian politics and still is critical and still is, but he didn't really take that as some sort of because I was in jail or because I'm Albanian, I should not award the. So I mean, we had this kind of situation, which I think will come very soon to when the war ends. So I hope it will end as soon as possible, but we should be prepared for this kind of situation when festivals will invite and then maybe create some sort of tension. But this is the discussion for a near future, hopefully as near as possible.
I can have just a short reference because, yeah, hopefully we are getting to the end of the war, but maybe we are getting to the beginning of the war. You know, you never know. And just a historical reference that Triumph of the Will, yeah, René Riefenstahl's film was awarded in 1935 in Venice the best foreign film, best foreign documentary film. So there is this kind of responsibility of artists and curators to whom should be given space.
Yeah, and there is a difference between programming a film on competition or out of competition, I think. And I think, I mean, I'm not criticizing the fact that you programmed that Serbian film on competition. What I'm saying is that, I don't know, in abstract, right now I'm not sure I would put a Russian film in competition, for example. Because awards mean more than the film itself. It means something else. And so I think that's, you know, when we go to the details, we can see a lot of ways of how festivals are politically shaped. And
yeah, that's why I mentioned that this discussion is probably for somewhere, hopefully in the near future, and hopefully this is not the start of the new, bigger war. Because we will come to it, and then again it will be a decision on each festival whether to program, if you program, what does it mean, and are you ready to face some sort of backlash or criticizing, and I think we need to be prepared for that. It's much more difficult question for my colleague Victoria and people from Ukraine, because there lies we are in a, let's say, a bit of a safer position. But for her, I took the responsibility then, and I think it paid off. I think it was a good decision, because if we didn't invite the film in 2004, we would probably invite in 2005. We would not wait until 2020, because we wanted to do it, and because there is a Serbian population still living in Kosovo, and especially in the city where I live. So I think it's a moral obligation, and then we were prepared for some sort of criticism, and I think we did a good thing. But I'm not sure what kind of advice I would give to Victoria at this moment, because at this moment it's too difficult. I say impossible.
Yeah, but I also think, you know, it's interesting, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, I just think that when it's also very important difference, maybe when war started in Kosovo, when it was actually happening, there were no this kind of very kind of powerful film community or people who could, you know, who basically could do this culture diplomacy on this very wide scale. I mean, I just think maybe it's still a bit different, you know, because this call actually it came because we have this community which basically was built over, I don't know, last 10 years, you know, and it just was impossible for these people who automatically, you know, got in their mind this very strong pro-Ukrainian idea, you know. And also I think that what I realized, I was actually thinking, is there is a sense in doing film festival when you have war in your country? I mean, and obviously there is, because the very important task then to support your people, to be on their side, no matter what, and to use all your intellectual potential, everything you have to support and protect them. And I think this ethical dimension, it's like became the most priority, and all other this kind of conversation should be, you know, to screen Russian films or to communicate them. It doesn't matter anymore. Like, you have this priority, you work like this, and I think we really do have very strong, prominent film community, unique, really very talented and gifted people who appeared in this community over the last 10 years, and it just was impossible to block it. Like, automatically, this people really create this message. Maybe it was too radical in the very beginning, but then, like, step by step, they start, you know, reshape it. And I think it will be changed also. Yeah, yes, true. Like, in a few months, in a year time, maybe it will be different. And also, I think that about this reconciliation with Russia, I think it's so much. It's very, very complicated now. First, because basically we deal now not just with simple Russia, but with whole this idea of this post-Soviet Union, you know, glory and whatever it is. And I think the post-Soviet Union, in history and everywhere, it's still like a country, you know, that saved the world. You know, they were never actually punished by all these communist crimes. They never acknowledged, you know, that there was a problem with that. So I think it's a very long history of some crimes which were never was like punished or discussed or whatever. And now more is coming, you know. So I think we need at least, I don't know, 50 years, you know, to change this, to discuss this, whatever. When I ask my German colleagues and friends, how many times did they need actually to process with this feeling of guilt? They said like 50 years, you know, at least, and we still, you know, have some uncomfortable situation about that. But at least we accepted the guilt, and this helped us a lot, you know, to proceed with this. So I mean, that's at the moment for me it's very complicated even to imagine this, because it's not just about Putin. Yes, not about his elite. It's about this history in progress, and it looks like we didn't learn many lessons, you know. So we need like to do our homework finally, and especially for people in Russia. I think that's my point.
Thank you for that. But I think I'd like to maybe move on now from the question of state actors and how festivals react to state actors, and go on to the question of ethics that festivals can adopt vis-a-vis individual filmmakers or films or film collectives or groups. So my way in for that is I'd like to ask you, Marek, so you programmed Sparsha, so could you maybe just give us a brief outline of what the controversy was around Sparsha, and then why you decided to program it and how? Because it wasn't just a film event, you had a panel discussion afterwards that was going to put certain things in context, and so if you could talk about that.
Yes, sure. We've planned 4 months to screen Sparta in the program. So I think it's just important to say at the beginning that this discussion was not created by the situation itself, but we plan to screen it with the producer, and then, you know, everything has changed. Probably you know, but very briefly, Der Spiegel, just I think 10 days, 2 weeks before the world premiere at Toronto, published an article about violating children's rights as actors in this film, and I would say in general, like very very tough way of communication to the families, not saying they, not getting them right information, and having this West European habits in poor Romania country, not being equal and fair in general. Yeah, you can find, it's translated into English, so you can find all details, and it's interesting to read and have create for yourself bigger picture. Then there was a reaction of the director Ulrich Seidel and of producer Philippe Aubert, saying that it's not so easy, and they don't think that they did it like it's written in an article. But it was very short before the world premiere in Toronto, so Toronto decided to cancel the premiere, and then the followed screening was planned for San Sebastian as a European premiere, and San Sebastian decided to keep it, so it was world premiere then at San Sebastian. So again, like we had a huge discussion. We screened the film finally when it was finished, and realized that those moments which are written in the article, we do not see in the film. So that was like an interesting moment for us, that maybe, or not maybe, for sure, it's not the only case these things are happening. We know about many filmmakers which are really violating people in the crew, violating women, violating characters, actors in front of the camera. Some years ago, it was more like a joke, yeah, that this is part of cinema, yeah, it's normal. It has changed a lot, the perception of this, but the feeling we had after watching the film is that we should share this experience with our viewers, to know that one thing is the film itself, and the other thing is how it's made, but it's connected. But also because we screened Seidel's films in past editions, Ulrich Seidel was here at the masterclass, and we somehow were close to his radical way of filmmaking, yeah? We would find hypocritical not to screen it. So we edit it as another part of our ethical programs and discussions. We related step by step to the festival programming, because we had this one day and first edition of ethical conference about like the ethics in documentary filmmaking, using of power in the crew or between the crew and the social actors. So in a way, it became part of it. And I think it's more general question that also thanks to Me Too, but also thanks to switch of our narrative during pandemic, that we not so much stick anymore to growth, but much more think about ourselves, about well-being, you know, about these ethical layers. It's this ethical question is always somehow connected to documentary filmmaking, or filmmaking in general, is raising again. So that's why we use the screening to sharing the issue as complex issue.
And could you talk very quickly about the debate you had afterwards, and then the way you decided to screen it?
And of course we invited the director, but he's not appearing at screenings now. I know that he's planning to have a distribution premiere in Austria, probably trying to bring the Romanian actors and families to Vienna. So we will see what happens. I think it's a good thing that this kind of pressure was created, because it's important to talk and be serious about these issues. But of course, we challenge the question how to make the Q&A without the director, and we do not want to analyze the film without him, because it's misleading. So we were asking ourselves, what's in general this issue? Because it's not only about like changing the perspective of, you know, responsibility of filmmakers, but it's about changing the perspective of children's rights. And I think this is something we should focus on, or we decided during the discussion, focus on, and we invited several like psychologists or people who are really in these cases, yeah. And because, you know, we can again be easily hypocritical, saying that, for example, Ulrich Seidel or other filmmakers are using non-adults for their art and not being fair with them, but they are not the only ones if they do this, yeah? Many families, many parents are violating their own kids' rights, pushing them to sport, pushing them to advertising or whatever, yeah? In many ways, even violating in terms of being violent to them. So we wanted to be more open to ourselves, how we deal as a society with this issue.
So then, I guess the difference, if I imagine being in a programming position, is that with state actors, you know exactly what it is because everything is in the news and the positions are clear. With this, you're dependent on a Spiegel article coming out and having to react to something that wasn't known before. So how, I mean, it's a very difficult question because you can only be in a reactive position with problems of individual responsibility as opposed to an active position which you decide from the outset vis-a-vis certain state actors. And so I don't know if that conundrum, it's a catch-22, if there's any way that you can preventively take certain measures, or if that's a conversation that's possible or not.
Maybe I add just one thing, what we also mentioned before, last sentence, that we did our own research then. So we really get in touch with Romanian producers or companies who were helping with shooting there. And also we get in touch with Austrian filmmakers from a younger generation, discussed with them what they think about this. Because, you know, it's our, like, our vision of Austrian cinema is different compared to what Austrians think about their national cinema, and of course they know many more details. So these references were also important for us.
No, I just wanted to add a nuance to the discussion. It's not so much about this film; it's also about this film, but which is the colonialist tradition of cinema, right? And this weird thing. I mean. That happens all the time, right? These rich countries that go and shoot in poor countries, usually less white countries, and because they can pay, they make their own rules. I mean, this team, and for me, the problem is not Ulrich Seidel per se. The problem is the structure. What are the contracts? What are the labor relationships? You know, I'm interested in that. Mainly, I don't think it's about canceling Ulrich Seidel, right? I'm not interested in, it's about how can we be preventive? And being preventive is not about canceling, it's about discussing the systemic situation that allows for these things to happen. And I think that besides children's rights and vulnerable people's rights, there's also the colonialist aspect that is not enough discussed. I mean, we may or not be admirers of Ulrich Seidel's films, but it's true that through his cinema we can actually think about this. Our other filmmakers' work. So, for example, why is it that if you are a richer country and you go to a poorer country, the rules are not the same? Why is it that you have, I mean, I go to Mexico and Mexicans tell me, yeah, we make money because with foreign teams because we are all narcos. We are all accepting to be shot as narcos or shoot each other as narcos on teams for them. I mean, Ospina did a film about this in 1973 called Vampires of Poverty. And it's very interesting because some people watch the film and react against the film when actually the discussion is still super alive. It's how, I mean, I read the Spiegel investigation, and it's obvious. I mean, you have people who have no money. The children can get some money. The parents were not even allowed on the set. What Swedish parent would not be on the set with their children, right? So for me, it's racism. It's racism, it's colonialism, and it's not Ulrich Seidel. It's a systemic system. It's a systemic problem. It's an environment. It's maybe in the nature of film itself. Maybe we need to discuss that openly. I mean, you know, cinema is also a colonial weapon. So I'm interested in that discussion, and I have no solution as a programmer. I always prefer to program than not to program. But this is the kind of discussion that I think we need to make, and suddenly we are shocked. But this is happening every day.
But I think we should not be shocked, because there have been signs all years, for many years, and there had been rumors and talks about von Trier and abusing actors and actresses on sets, and so I don't think we should be shocked. It's part of the system, as Cynthia mentioned, and of course Me Too was a big trigger. I don't think this kind of things would surface or appear if it wasn't for Me Too. I think that the whole Me Too thing kind of opened the door and gave power, in a way, so that you can move forward and say, I was abused, or my rights were taken or abused, because these things happened not now, happened in the past, happened but the good thing is it will happen less. So I think it's good why these kind of things are surfacing, that actually is what brings to the prevention. And of course, we as a gatekeepers, our prevention is to be as informed as possible. That's part of our obligation, to know about things. Be informed, because if we have programmers who don't know about the Philippines and the culture and things, it's very easy that this kind of things can slip and then be faced with some sort of controversy, because, for example, they didn't know about some nuances in the culture and why it's important. So I think our responsibility is to be informed as possible, and that's what's could help prevent, maybe.
Can I just add one thing? Because for me, you know, Toronto cancelling or banning the film, it's quite hypocritical. I would love to do this exercise if I had time, which is to go to Toronto's program and look at all the other films and see if there's no other example of films that could be questioned through these filters, through this perspective. So, you know, it's a question of institutional defensiveness and optics, which we are all too much obsessed with. But there's a deeper...
I mean, I guess it raises the question in a way which is constantly brought up and constantly deconstructed and yet constantly there, which is that of the autonomy of the field versus the society it's supposed to represent. So how, to what extent do you defend your right to screen or produce or debate something that is in many ways against a moral code or a legal code, because the fact of its existence is enough to justify that there should be a debate. I don't know if you had anything to say, because what's interesting about both your festivals is also that there's a focus in them, or in certain sections of them, about human rights. And so I guess that immediately raises other question about choices on how to program or not.
Well, unfortunately, I haven't seen this particular film and didn't know about the story, only heard now here in Ji.hlava. It just reminded me also, there are a lot of stories like that, and it's really, I think it's a very interesting conversation. It automatically reminded me about Ilya Khrzhanovsky while he was doing his DAO film, and there are so many stories of this kind and rumors inside Ukrainian film community. I remember there were, it was even like unofficial, but if we were some kind of all acknowledged people tried to ignore this kind of cooperation with him and tried to be kind of distant from all things happening there, but there were quite a bit similar things, I think, happening there, some story with children as well. Yes, so I think it's super important, yes, to talk about this. I just think it's very interesting because, for example, if we start this kind of conversation, we'll do all these panels of ethics, and for example, Ziodid will continue shooting like that. Are we going still to accept this? I mean, it's a really good question. I mean, we do as much as we can. We organize discussion, invite Ulik Zaydel. Same like Ilya Khrzhanovsky, for example. He still continued doing his own thing, no matter words. Many questions to his project, especially his project in Babi Yar, which was lots of discussion inside the country. What about that? If he actually could represent, you know, the whole tragedy and this memorial and everything. Yeah, so I don't know. Yes, it's good things to discuss, but I think should we really do something about this, or should we just, you know, let them be? They are like a big maestros. And
but the question is that I don't think the main problem is the filmmakers. I think because the filmmakers, one thing is to make, I think every filmmaker should make the film they want, you know, and as long as they are not doing crimes, right? The problem is, what is a crime? And when you see, I mean, my country is doing like tax rebates and, you know, these amazing measures for attracting foreign money to your industry, usually designed by companies, private companies, some in London, you know. I don't know, Czech Republic's part of its funding was designed by the same company that is now designing the strategic program for Portugal, Oldsberg, London. So, it's corporations, right, designing public policy. Why aren't the tax rebates programs, for example, in these sort of policies to attract foreign money, don't come with a set of rules that are established about respecting the workers and the actors and the place's rights? This is a government question, this is a policy question. And so I think that festivals, by showing the films, but also discussing this and calling out the responsible ones, actually can have a really important role here. So canceling films, to be honest, it's just good for Facebook and Twitter for a week. But to be actually engaged in the discussion and you know, like calling out the ones who have the power to prevent this and don't, I think it's more effective. So it's not so much for me to know if Ulrich Seidel will continue or not doing films in, I mean, probably if we wouldn't allow him or his crew to mistreat people, they wouldn't, and he still would make his films. So, and I'm happy that he does. You know, as long as people make their films, it's great.
Can I follow? Just one sentence that the system in Czech Republic has changed now in supporting much more national films than coming from abroad. But I really like your point of colonialism in cinema. And I think it's a really strong question, not much reflected. But for example, speaking in details from perspective of Czech Republic or Eastern Europe, I'm always suspicious when I see, for example, film from Eastern Europe shot by West European crew. That doesn't mean that filmmakers should not shoot outside their countries, but this is a different case, because usually these films are shot in poor countryside, yeah? What's so far from the complexity of reality. But in a way, it's a systemic problem, because it's not then only those crews coming somewhere, shooting something they know would be sellable at countries from which they are coming, but also that then even filmmakers from these countries are pushed through, you know, training programs or co-productions to do the same, because it's the way how it should be done. Yeah, it's the way which will be sold, and I think that this is a big problem, because then we are creating completely fake reflection of our countries and of our times. And of course, we are not screening these films. I mean.
Maybe just to add that this kind of controversies are happening elsewhere also, and with the different ethical issues. There's a film that has generated a lot of controversy early this year called Jihad Rehab, about a group of Yemeni prisoners from Guantanamo released to Saudi Arabia and then undergoing rehabilitation treatment in a special place or rehab center in Saudi Arabia to become less terrorist or whatever. And the filmmaker is an American filmmaker who has been trained as a firefighter. So coming back to what Marek mentioned, that, you know, we should be a bit suspicious when we are faced with films of filmmakers. I don't want to say that all of them are bad, but in a tricky situation like this one, when you are a Western filmmaker coming to the Arab country to treat a story so sensitive about several prisoners who have never been actually convicted, but have been kept in Guantanamo prison for more than 10 years and then released to Saudi Arabia. So again, it was a huge ethical problem at the premiere of the film at Sundance Film Festival. Some of the resigns were directly influenced by the decision to screen the film. Later on, even the director of Sundance resigned. I don't know if because of the film or some other issues, but ethical questions and films that have ethical dilemmas can sometimes generate huge things, and this is what is happening actually in United States with this film.
Yes, there is a question.
Great, yeah.
Just microphone.
No, it's okay. I can speak loud.
No.
It's for the
stream.
Hi. I'm born in Russia. I raised in Israel. I'm an American filmmaker who did already 2 movies about Ukraine. And talking about jihad, which actually reflected a lot on my work, like a lot of situations that I was facing. I did a movie Winter on Fire on Ukrainian Maidan. I just recently did movie Freedom on Fire, following my steps from Maidan. For example, for me, I was also attacked on that situation with the jihad, because A, I'm Russian, and how come I'm coming from West and doing movie on Ukraine? I was literally attacked on these situations. And for example, for me, I had objectivity to tell the story. As the Western filmmaker who is living for, I left Russia in '91. And I did Ukrainian Maidan, I did Situation right now. I had objectivity to tell the story. My Winter on Fire was accepted also by Ukrainian nation, was accepted by the world. And I tried to be objective, which allowed me not to be biased to my subjects and be objective as somebody who's coming from outside. So jihad opened a little bit different situation in America. And I see it right now on right and left. Some people from the Middle East, filmmakers from Middle East, started to say, oh, only Middle Eastern filmmakers allowed to tell Middle Eastern stories. Same Pandora box was recently opened, and I was talking to one of the programmers of Toronto who've been at Cannes and in Poland, who heard how, for example, Ukrainian filmmakers said, oh, only Ukrainian filmmakers can do Ukrainian stories. So, for example, I think every filmmaker allowed to tell story. I agree with you, it's bad or good. That's actually ethics to filmmakers. I think we, as documentary filmmakers, we have complete responsibility. And there is a filmmakers who not obeying by these rules. I know very famous filmmakers in the United States who literally doing propaganda things and following these steps. And there is legitimate filmmakers who putting their lives on a line with the fire and telling the stories. So I think it's about filmmakers, and it's exactly like you said. You, as the programmers of the festivals, you on your shoulders have even more responsibility to, Marek, you said it, more responsibility to select movies that not aligned with propaganda and not aligned with the bad filmmaking who have specific agenda. Or like you said, specifically backed with certain institutions. So that's what I want to say.
Can I just answer one thing? I agree with you on most of it. I'm a bit worried when you say you are objective. That principle makes me shiver. Yes, especially when you say that your objectivity also comes from your distance. That's a principle of ethnography, actually. And we all know the history of ethnography. Very interesting, but also very problematic. But the fact that a filmmaker relies on their illusion of objectivity, in principle, for me, makes me suspicious about their approach to any reality that is not an intimate reality, meaning that I believe that the ethics in cinema relies on subjectivity and on intimacy and on personal and intimate engagement with what we are doing. So for me, a filmmaker is very different from a journalist or a lawyer or a judge. And so if I was Ukrainian and I knew that a Russian filmmaker, even if you left Russia in '91, was doing a film in Ukrainian saying they are objective, I would run from them. But if I knew that a Russian filmmaker was doing a film about their personal engagement with the crisis that is happening and looking for some intimate, subjective, specific connection with what is going on, I would wait and see, you know? So this is a huge discussion. I don't want to boycott your panel, but just to say that I do question that a lot. And I think the colonial problem comes a lot from that. From the fact that the North built an illusion of objectivity, specific in documentary tradition, that completely smashed any sense of nuance, any sense of oppression, any sense of exploitation and extractivism. It became an extractivist industry, the objectivist industry. Objective. We can talk, but I didn't say I'm right. I'm just saying
So I've got another question. We've got about 5 minutes left, and it's good that it's open to the audience, but maybe to get an idea of how many people can talk. You have a question here, potentially an answer here. Is there? So maybe, okay. So maybe start, and then we'll see if we have time.
I'm sorry, don't want to take so much time, but actually I think maybe it's not just the best expression, the objectivity, maybe it's something like what I have understood. I would say like it's kind of like being overloaded by these national narratives, because I think I have had a similar experience that sometimes, you know, part of Middle East, I kind of know the environment, and I'm kind of like, I don't want to make it too big, but let's say respected, but locals and even local production, let's say, in a way that they feel like I'm competent enough to film there, and because certain areas I know quite well. But I think I rather would face a problem like when dealing with European programmers, maybe because they see my surname and they are like, okay, she's abroad and she does this colonialistic kind of approach that she comes, you know, and films about place she wasn't born, you know, or like she doesn't really have like the origin. So I think it's another illusion. It's like, oh, the second side of the coin. Like it's good to be careful, but at the same time not to go like with this automatic judgment that once you are not from there or you were not born there, that automatically, you know, you do this kind of colonialistic approach. So I would rather say it's not like the objectivity, subjectivity, but it's rather that the locals sometimes feel like if some foreigner who has been living there and kind of doing research and so on, it's like they allow them, let's say, to film them because they are not so overloaded with those narratives. And sometimes even people who are very like critical and they are from there, they feel like it's their kind of rule that they have to protect the narrative, even though they sometimes don't agree, because it's just not possible to get out of the identity. So maybe it was too abstract, but I was just thinking it's good to kind of make it clear that it's not really like subjectivity, objectivity, but to get out of this overloading, you know, with the narratives that are sometimes just impossible to escape. So, yeah, sorry, it was too long.
If I can quickly just react, because I think not stick to word objectivity or subjectivity, because in a way I think you have the same meaning behind this. But my favorite joke is when European Union wanted to create European books for schools and started with history, and they decided to create historical books for France and Germany together. And they immediately realized that it's not possible. So, you know, there are problems which we are facing, and there is a lot of work we have to do, and Germans have completely different objectivity, even subjectivity, on these issues compared to French people. But it's behind this, yeah? It's really about the way the questions we are taking today, and we are dealing with past, and we have to somehow find our way to understand each other and to understand what the meanings of different things. But yeah, it would be great to have, you know, European history, and all nations would agree that this happened objectively like this.
Yeah. I'm very sorry, this sounds like a very, very interesting, but we're kind of wrapping up on the time for the live stream. I can only invite you to come and approach us and give further answers and questions. But in the meantime, thank you very much to all the 4 participants for your answers and your debates. And it's both the richness and the tragedy of such debates that they can never be closed fully, and so the wounds have to stay open, like you said. But thank you all for your answers, and thank you all for your presence, and thank you.